Before we dive into the lecture, we would like to start with a quick question for our side. A 12-day Iran-Israel war erupted after Israel launched preemptive strike on Iranian nuclear and military sites, prompting missile and drone retaliation from Iran that heavily impact both nations and risks dragging in the US and the region to a fragile US probe. Ceasefire is now holding. With this volatile ceasefire in place, can US diplomatic efforts effectively de-escalate the broader Israel-Iran-Palestine conflict, or is the region still at the risk of spiraling back into the open warfare?
Recording in progress.
First of all, thank you, Farah, Gio, and the entire team for organizing this. Really appreciate it, and I'm very blessed to be here. So thanks for the invitation as well. Let me just try to share my slides. And with regards to your question, I don't know if you can see my slides. You can see, right? Thumbs up. Good. Okay, so with regards to your question in terms of can US diplomatic efforts effectively de-escalate? So yes, it already has. So if you can see, just in the past 12 days or so, it's been very tumultuous, very crazy. You know, we almost were on the brink of nuclear warfare, I guess. And it's very destabilizing, and it's really a cause for concern because, as we all remember, when Trump came to power, right? We had all the Capitol riots, all the insurrection, and all that. So, and we have this big MAGA following, and remember his like bloody nose, bloody ear. So he came on the basis of he wanted to pull out of all wars, all pointless wars, very sort of like this isolationist policies, right? But the thing that we have to understand is Trump is someone that is very impulsive. So he says one thing and means something the next day. So it's very like what he says is very, he wants that spotlight. He wants that attention. He wants to be seen as the savior of the Middle East. And so we have to remember that the Israeli lobby, which I'll get to in throughout my slides, is very strong. So they have enormous influence in American foreign policy, and Trump has to juggle through that. But I'm very happy actually because if you have seen, I don't know if you've kept up to date with the recent news. Trump in that video, Trump was like uttering profanities. He was very angry at Israel. Never before have you had a sitting U.S. president openly criticize Israel like that, because you got to remember that Israel is very influential, very powerful, and this is not some anti-Semitic trope saying that Jewish billionaires own the world, but it is true because, for example, a lot of his close peers, you have these neocons, which are war hawks. They're very conservative. They're very they're all about American exceptionalism. We can only solve Middle East issues through violence, through aggression, through military might. So you have all these war hawks, these neocons, and these evangelicals. So you can see Mike Huckabee, United States ambassador to Israel, he sent Trump a text saying that, like very theological, very biblical, saying that God will give you this sort of like enlightened revelation that you have to be the savior of Israel. And what's in it for them? What has Israel ever benefited the average American, right? And because his basis, you can see this shift between MAGA supporters because they don't really care about Israel. They just want Trump to focus on America first issues, economic inequality, healthcare, like taxing the rich, and so on, all of this. So, and they don't want to get embroiled in foreign wars. So for him to come out, he's actually fighting all these demons in his cabinet. So you have a lot of challenges that he faced, but he's still trying to stick his ground, stick to his principles as best as he can. Because Trump, as we know, he's very transactional. He's business minded. What's in it for us? What's in it for America? But you have a lot of lobbyists like Miriam Adelson, Sheldon Adelson, a very prominent rich Jewish billionaire, pro-Zionist. So she donated $100 billion to Trump's campaign. So you have a lot of these very prominent infiltration of Zionist lobby groups within Trump's circle. And you have a lot of, like, for example, Fox News anchors and all that. But then you have this shift because like Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, they're all starting to see. So you have this really it's quite amazing actually to see how much divided the Trump support is. There, it was just actually good for the Palestinian cause because they're starting to see that there's cracks in the Israeli lobby on how they can maintain that narrative of America's first. Because so far, America's foreign policy with regards to the Middle East has always been to the benefit of Israel. It's always Israel first. So for Trump to come in and immediately impose ceasefires for Israel and then publicly criticize Israel for having their jets because Israel's foreign policy is all about escalation deterrence, the Dahiya doctrine, which I will get to. It's always about overwhelming military power against the opponent so that they'll be really reluctant to retaliate. So it's like this escalation, this double thing going on, doubling down. Um, and usually, when you have no other choice but to accept a ceasefire, you know that you can't continue. So there's two things to look at it, right? Israel, they're not fighting refugees, they're not fighting unarmed civilians, women, children, they're not bombing refugee tents, they're not bombing hospitals. They're bombing a sovereign nation, which has really got quite sophisticated military, weaponry, air defense, ballistic missile program is very advanced in Iran. So this is not we're not talking about Gazans under-equipped. You're talking about Iran, a full-fledged nation state with its own sophisticated military, armed forces, and branch. So for Israel to force to accept that ceasefire indicates two things. First, they know that okay, Tel Aviv. So there's this recent former U.S. government official that said Tel Aviv, one third of Tel Aviv has been bombed. Right? He came out to say that, and it's true because Israel has this military censorship doctrine that we don't really know what exactly has been bombed because they're trying to hide the casualties. What we can see is just people have been uploading the one that the military actually allows the media to let out, right? We can see that in Gaza, they didn't accept the ceasefire. In Lebanon, they didn't accept the ceasefire, but here they're forced to accept because there has been concrete, tangible damage to Tel Aviv, Haifa, numerous Israeli cities that Iranian missiles has gotten through. And secondly, because Trump is just has that personality weight. So when you're talking about Trump, he's not your conventional average U.S. president that's backed by IPAC lobby. He wasn't brought to power by Israeli lobby. He was brought to power because of his own organic support group, right? So Trump doesn't need Israel. Israel needs him. So meaning that the political repercussions, the consequences of taking a less pro-Israeli stance is less damaging to Trump. You got to remember, he's a billionaire and he's got his organic MAGA supporters that's independent of Israeli lobby groups. So they like Trump because of his personality. They want to follow him. That's why he was involved in the insurrection, the Capitol riots, and so on. So he can weather through the negative consequences of having less pro-Israeli stance compared to other presidents. And you got to remember that he's sort of like a lame duck, right? Because U.S. Constitution forbids U.S. presidents for running for more than two consecutive terms, for more than two terms. So all of this is what led to the U.S. success in implementing that ceasefire. And of course, Trump is in a position where he has to do something. He has to take over. He doesn't want Netanyahu. He doesn't want Israel to hijack his sort of like foreign policy narrative. So he wants that spotlight where he's the savior of the Middle East, like possibly eyeing for a Nobel Peace Prize. So that's why he came. He had to do something, but very limitedly. So he just sent in U.S. troops, mobilized. So he sent in B-2 bombers to bomb Iranians for because they have the bunker buster bombs, right? So he has to do something, but very limited because he doesn't want another U.S. to get involved in the Middle East. Iran is very mountainous. It's not flat like Iraq, and you can never change a regime through air power alone. It's never happened before. You need boots on the ground, right? So all of these factors play in, and Netanyahu he knows like the destruction of Tel Aviv. Maybe he's right. We got to follow him. We have no other choice because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Trump would be very angry at Netanyahu saying that, look, I've already helped you. I've already bombed here. You got to come to middle ground. You got to, because remember, Trump is, unlike other US presidents, I feel like Trump likes his ties with the Gulf countries, right? So he recently he had that $1 million plane from Qatar. He has good relations with the Saudis, and the thing with the Palestinian issue is that you can see that instead of this Sunni Shia proxy war with Saudi and Iran, everyone became united, like against Israel. And Saudi and Iran, they're like trying to vie for the hegemon in the region, right? And so is Israel. Israel wants to be a hegemon in the region, and so does Saudi and Iran. So, but because of Israel's first preemptive strike, illegal strike on Iran, you have that notion that there's no such thing as that Sunni Shiite divide. Let's just put that aside. Let's just unite first, because this is really grave, devastating for the Middle East policy, for the Middle East stability, right? Because not only that, you're going to have a lot of refugees coming over. Remember the Syrian refugee crisis? They came in droves. The fact that it was like a whole issue in the European Union. You have refugees dying in the Mediterranean and so on. So another war in the Middle East is really not good for tourism, for economy, for trade and all that. So that's the thing. So obviously we have Trump as a personality factor, very like he's trying to be a strong man because he's got to do something. He was already looking at week last week in Ukraine. He didn't do anything with Russia too much. He said he was going to solve it, but it's there's he failed in that. And also, we don't know behind the scenes. Qatar has been a really big mediator lately in the past few years. They're really good at their mediation game behind the scenes. And of course, you have other behind the scene Gulf countries that are working to try to de-escalate, right? So that's why you see that Iranians, when they wanted to de-escalate, it's also on the Iranian side, they have to do something for the domestic population, domestic consumption, because if they don't do something, it makes them look as weak, not just to domestically, but also to their allies. So, but even then, they notified Qatar first that we're going to bomb this and this airbase before, right? So Qatar knows beforehand, and it was very limited response, right? And of course, we can't verify whether U.S. has already bombed nuclear facilities already been destroyed. There's no verification. Some analysts have said that it's not completely destroyed. They've removed out the enriched uranium, while others have said that it's completely destroyed. So I think for now, I'm actually happy that it's been de-escalated. We just have to see how long the ceasefire will last, because you're not talking about Lebanon with a fledgling economy. You're not talking about bombing unarmed civilians, refugee camps, tents, whatever. You're talking about a very sophisticated, big country with 90 million people. In a war of attrition, Israel cannot last, right? Its economy is already in shambles. Iron Dome already been bypassed. Iran has a lot of strong ballistic missile program, so it can just drag on the war. Remember that they fought Iraq for 8 years. Saddam couldn't penetrate to Iran, right? So if they kicked into high gear, short term, Israel may be winning, right? Short term, like killing and all. But if they mobilize everyone, all the industry in Iran, because Iran is facing sanctions, but they're still surviving. Even though their GDP is not that big, I think Malaysia GDP and Indonesia GDP is way bigger than Iran, but they're surviving. They have local domestic industries. They make their own drones. Even they have the strategic alliance with Russia. They're sending the Shahid drones to Russia and all that. So it's very sophisticated and advanced, and the ballistic missiles as well. So they're very you're not fighting some ragtag group of non-state actors. You're fighting a full-fledged state that, if push comes to shove in terms of existential crisis, then they'll fight all out. They've even said that. So war of attrition long term, Israel and the West cannot win. Look what happened in Afghanistan. They got kicked out. Hundreds of thousands of civilians died, including like U.S. troops died, all for nothing. They got kicked out, and they got kicked out in Vietnam. They got kicked out in Iraq. So it's all this rhetoric about weapons of mass destruction, which were fake, and just trying to constant need to regime change other countries, to stick your nose in the domestic affairs of other countries, is just not going to work out. And U.S. policymakers and Pentagon, they know that, look, China is our peer competitor. We have to stick in the middle, in East Asia. We have to be there. That's our serious competition. Iran is not our competition, as to what the Israelis are trying to portray and demonize Iran as sort of like this boogeyman superpower in the region. No, Iran is not, nowhere near. US's main competitor is China. So they're trying to detract themselves from that region. Okay, so I'm just going to go quickly through my slides. Sorry for taking a bit too long, but yeah, we'll just have to see. But yes, US has managed to de-escalate it, which I'm very happy because war is never good for both sides. Let me try to see if I can do full screen. And can you give me a thumbs up if you can still see it? Full screen? Okay, thank you. So understanding Israel's state behavior through international relations lenses. So let me know if I'm going too fast. So where are we at now? I'm just going to go through these key points. Just talk a bit about Israeli aggression as currently Middle East source of instability. I'm not trying to demonize Israel all the way, but as of right now, in the status quo, they're the middle, in my opinion, Middle East source of instability. Because you can argue that before this, Saddam Hussein was when they invaded Kuwait, right? Destabilizing factor. Even though they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, but they went ahead to invade Kuwait. You shouldn't invade Kuwait. I mean, there was a big mistake on that, and but we just have to be careful about the nuances and the rhetoric and the propaganda on the Western side. But we have to be critical. We have to accept certain things. So as of right now, Israel seems to be the Middle East source of instability. And then destruction of international law, Western hypocrisy, it seeks to be a regional hegemon, present conflict embedded in colonialism. I'll talk a bit about post-colonial studies, looking at the time as well, and then we can talk a bit about present-day Israel. Okay, so this is just, I don't want to talk a lot about what Israel has done. I think we all know, because you guys can just find it in the news. Let's just go through it quickly. So Israeli aggression right now on multiple fronts. In Gaza, 61,709 people died. Ongoing genocide, 200. So this is the largest ever war where you have a lot of journalists killed, medic officers, and it's so well documented. It's everywhere. So you cannot hide these things. Intent to commit genocide is there. So you have ongoing ICC arrest warrants, you have ICJ, and so on, right? Um, and then, so Israel does have nuclear weapons, around 90 warheads. They're maintaining strategic ambiguity. They don't allow IAEA inspectors to come in to look at their nuclear weapons program, and they keep quiet about it. So they're the only country in the Middle East right now with a nuclear weapon. And so they've dropped equivalent to 2 nuclear bombs on Gaza alone. Medical aid workers killed. You remember the hospital, the medical ambulances that was bombed and shot, right? You cannot hide that. The food workers, World Kitchen Program, whatever. So it's bad. Um, okay, so now West Bank, ongoing Israeli settler violence. There's no Hamas there, so it's all about Hamas. We got to be mindful of that. There is, so with West Bank is actually the part of the Palestinian territories, right? There's no Hamas there, but for a future Palestinian state, they need West Bank. They need this occupied Palestinian territories, but how can they have it when you have over 700,000 illegal Israeli settlers there, sponsored by the Israeli government, protected by the IDF? So there's always, and they are armed. So armed illegal Israeli settlers. So the law always favors Israeli settlers as opposed to the native Palestinians there. So it's always unfair. It's always biased. Always, it is apartheid policy in the West Bank. So under international law, Fourth Geneva Convention bans occupying power from transferring its own population to an occupied area. So this remains constant. This is the constant variable. Even if there's no Iran-Israeli war, there's no genocide in Gaza, this thing is constant. It has been going on for decades. So the fact that they've been constantly trying to increase the number of settlers encroaching into Israeli in Palestinian territory, that's the illegal settlements. They're not genuine for two-state solution. They don't want Palestinians to have their own state. How can they have their own state when you have to uproot nearly 1 million illegal Israeli settlers and who are very right-wing extremists? They see themselves, they don't see Palestinians. So of course you have roads for Palestinians and roads for Israelis and all that. So it's just is state-sponsored systemic structural racism and inequality. Okay, and aggression in Lebanon, 4,000 Lebanese civilians, blah, 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 blah. And Israeli army is still in Lebanon right now, ongoing, right? Syria, so they've actually pushed further beyond the occupied Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory, further into Syrian territory, taking advantage of the instability that Syria is currently experiencing, ongoing because of the transition from Assad to the the new leader of Syria, right? So there's been countless extraterritorial strikes, violation of airspaces and sovereignty in Syria and Lebanon without impunity. They can just do it like easily, just like that, and no one can stop them. Um, so yeah, of course, let's not forget that just before this, they bombed the Iranian consulate, right, in Syria and Damascus, and this violation of Vienna diplomatic conventions. You just cannot bomb diplomatic embassies like that. You just cannot. Imagine if Iran was to do that on an Israeli embassy. Oh, it'll be on the 9 to 5 news, wall to wall, right? So Israel is the only country that can do that. Um, okay, so Iran, as we all know, it's still ongoing. 600 people killed. State TV bombed. Residential complexes bombed. Energy sector. And remember, Iran has joint oil field gas with Qatar, and it's engaged in trade relations with other surrounding countries. It has relations with Russia and China. So Israel has bombed residential buildings. It's conquered Iranian skies, although Iranian air defenses has shot down several Israeli Shahed drones. Sorry, Israeli Hermes drones, and constant violation of Iranian airspace and Iraqi airspace. So it's violating a third country's airspace to get to Iran, right? So remember, Israel started provoking Iran first. It started the first strike on Iran first. We got to remember that. And the Western media hasn't even focused on that. It's always focused on Israel has the right to defend itself. So, well, Iran has the right to defend itself, obviously, and everyone knows this. So it's amazing how global rhetoric has tremendously shifted against Israel because they know that Israel started first, is the source of instability. So bombing of Syria's military assets, Iranian assets. Why would you bomb a state TV? Why? Why? It's even if we were to accept that under international law, you're allowed to engage in very limited preemptive strike. But international law, specifically international humanitarian law, because that deals with law of armed conflict, you cannot bomb something where the imminent threat is long term. Like, okay, so imminent threat must be immediate, meaning that in 5 minutes, Iran is going to bomb Israel. That's allowed in international law. So international law allows very slight leeway in terms of preemptive right to self-defense. You can read it up, but it needs to be imminent. So Iranians threat is not imminent. We don't know. It's like what you cannot be in 1 year. Iran will have a nuclear warhead. Allegedly, that's not an imminent threat. It cannot be in 1 month, Iran, because Netanyahu has been saying Iranian nuclear bomb threat for 30 years, right? So it's just weak. Under international law, is weak. International law allows for self-defense if it's ongoing aggression that you're suffered, but it doesn't. It's very strict with regards to imminent preemptive self-defense. So it's Israel is literally setting the norm. It's a trendsetter in violating international law on preemptive strikes. So, and this is something that is destroying the rules-based order, right? So I don't want to talk about too much about Iran. So, you can find that on the news because I want to get through like all the other theoretical key points. My apologies. Okay, so Israeli foreign policy. We're talking about Israeli foreign policy now, and this is something that is, if you take out Netanyahu, there may be a bit of lull, but it's ongoing. So it doesn't matter whoever is in power. Israeli foreign policy for decades has been constant, right? It's just that it just so happens Netanyahu and his right wing cabinet, his ruling coalition, is very right wing, ultra nationalist, ultra orthodox, which works in favor of ICJ cases against them because there's so many well documented intent to prove that Israel has been doing genocide. Not just that, you have dancing IDF soldiers on TikTok showing them blowing up schools, hospitals, and so on, right? So Israeli foreign policy is always geared towards perpetual warfare. It's always trying to manufacture this constant existential threat towards itself, where it's saying that everyone's out to get us. We're fighting a war on 7-6 fronts, even though we started it first, even if the threat is non-existent or minuscule, right? So Netanyahu has been saying Iran has been having nuclear bombs for 30 years, since 1980s, went on to bomb them. So it's sort of like to detract from their ongoing genocide in Gaza while they're still killing Gazans. And Israeli foreign policy is always about military superiority. If you analyze past wars, Israeli has always attempted to win wars through air power. So they're trying to always engage in preemptive strikes, bombing their enemies' air defenses, air capabilities first. So you have to remember, you have to realize that if you look at a strategic point, Israel doesn't have strategic depth, right? Strategic depth is meaning that if you the width of Israel is only about like 40 kilometers or 60 kilometers from it at its narrowest point. So that's like from what from Changlun to Alusta, right? It's not it's very like it's not they don't have strategic depth. Like for example, you look at Seoul with the North Korean border. It's just nearby. Conventional artillery can hit Seoul, just like conventional artillery can hit Tel Aviv. They don't have strategic depth. They don't have mountains to fall back to engage in guerrilla warfare. So it's all this buys into the strategic calculus. And state-sponsored terrorism, they've got Mossad and everything, ambiguity and strategic regional alliances. I'll talk to that in a bit, like Azerbaijan, Morocco, Tunisia, and doctrines. So this doctrine, Dahiya doctrine, meaning overwhelming destruction. It's sort of like scorched earth policy. So escalation deterrence. When they're attacked, they're gonna fight back tenfold because they can do that. There's no like they don't have to face consequences like with impunity. You know, no, they don't have the accountability. So it's always like that. So if Iran, like let's say tenfold. The Hia doctrine came from this neighborhood in Beirut in Lebanon, if I'm not mistaken. So they really destroyed, flattened the entire thing. It's like they're flattening Gaza indiscriminately, including imagine like in Australia, you in New Zealand, you have that Christchurch massacre, right? Where an Australian killed like 51 Muslims. And imagine if we were to use Israeli foreign policy, we would collectively punish all Australians because of what this one Australian did in Christchurch, killing 51 Muslims. So this is Israeli foreign policy, sort of like very general, and Hannibal Directive, where if an Israeli soldier is killed, or sorry, is kidnapped, or sort of like if they were to fall into enemy hands, um, they don't really care about them that much. It's secret, but it's well known, right? They just bomb them. They'll just kill them. That's why there's this. That's why Netanyahu has been trying to prevent this probe into what happened in October 7th, right? Because then you uncover that IDF actually killed a lot of Israelis using Apache helicopters. So he's trying to prevent that probe. Why? Why are you trying to hide the investigation? And also they're trying to hide the fact that maybe there's so much like killing, like they've actually killed their own civilians, their own hostages, more than they've actually rescued militarily. So they probably bombed their own hostages. Yeah. So, and then of course you have this very unwritten but rhetorical, especially in all these right-wing ministers, very right-wing, greater Israel expansionist policies. They say about it, right? It's all over Instagram. They're proud of that. And then false flag operations. But with regards to the doctrine, the Dahiya doctrine, yeah. So it's basically you use overwhelming power more than necessary to destroy or to achieve military objectives and target. So you basically let's just ignore international law, let's just bomb everything, flatten everything, right? And remember what they did in Gaza, starvation as a tool, illegal, um, constant blockade, even more blockade, weaponizing of humanitarian aid, cutting off water, collective punishment is illegal in international law. So you're perpetuating instability because when a country is rooted in colonialism, settler colony, you're trying to legitimize yourself through by have manufacturing threats that makes it valid for you to have all this excessive military doctrines, very aggressive policies and stance towards your neighbors, towards the people that you occupy, right? So it's like it's part and parcel of their foreign policy. Okay, so I'm trying to go real quickly. Um, okay, Israeli violations of international law. So I'm highlighting yellow because this remains constant. You have to remember that. remains constant, illegal settlements and OPT and annexations. So they can be a ceasefire in Gaza, there can be wars, whatever. This remains constant. How are we going to solve this? Because how are we going to uproot all these very fanatical right-wing settlers that are armed to the teeth, and they feel that their land is them because they were thought that way, right? They so resorting to biblical rhetoric and all that. Um, right. So siege of Gaza, collective punishment, blah blah blah, violation of sovereignty, and they've used chemical weapons in the past. So present conflict embedded in colonialism. So this is my theoretical lenses. So we have to look at post-colonialism in the study of international relations, because particularly in the Israel-Palestinian conflict, right? So post-colonial studies is basically critiques contemporary Western-centric, Eurocentric, conventional international relations theory like realism, right? Because realism it neglects historical colonial injustices. Realism is all about power, but it's all about it neglects how power came to be, how the global rules-based order came to be. It neglects that. So post-colonialism seeks to critique IR by adding that element and component of uh, the injustices suffered by the colonized people, right? Because international relations, contemporary conventional theory, the general theory is that um, power was just there. It happened in a vacuum. Somehow these states that are powerful suddenly came to the forefront because they just happened to be powerful, without without following the trajectory of how they came to power. All these permanent five states in the United Nations Security Council and so on. Then we'll take a look at settler colonialism. We'll take a look at similarities and differences, apartheid South Africa, settler colonies, and genocide. So you have to be rooted in theory, post-colonialism. So when we talk about post-colonialism, we're decolonizing IR, because we live in the global South. We were colonized here in Malaysia. So we've experienced it, right? So post-colonialism basically critiques knowledge, power, and representation in the IR discourse. Like, how did power come to be? Through what way? And how did the current knowledge and narrative came to be? So it brings indigenous natives, Aboriginal narratives to the forefront in addressing contemporary ongoing issues, as well as revisiting past issues. So when you talk about post-colonialism, it includes themes of exploitation, of genocide of the natives, of dispossession, gunboat diplomacy, and violation of sovereignty. Because to them, like the colonizers in the past, they don't see the natives as possessing sovereignty. And Voltaire had said this before in the past. You see the conquest of the Americas wiped out entire native populations to the brink of extinction. So post-colonialism reminds us, because a lot of the ongoing conflicts is because of colonialism. We can see the Sykes-Picot Agreement, McMahon Line, Durand Line. All the colonizers came together at the expense of the native population. They're far away, distant land, they're metropoles. They draw lines on the map. You get this, you get this, you get this, without even consulting the natives and um, even considering the ramifications it would have on the local tribes, the local populations, linguistic ties, tribal ties, and so on. So, and then there's also that perpetuation of subjugation, that poverty, that ideology that spreads, where it's a civilizational burden, white man's burden. We have to civilize you, you're backwards. Even though the existing natives there already had their political systems, already had their socio-economic system. So this is very important in IR. So this is what post-colonialism seeks to address and critique: flow of resources, and so on. So conventional IR theory sees international system as anarchy. I'm not saying that international like liberalism is good. Is good. I mean, it's you can see it's like it's clear, right? But it's a bit reductionist. So to understand certain protracted conflicts, you have to look back and rely on post-colonialism. So post-colonial scholars, they see international system as hierarchical, exploitative, race-based politics, West versus East. And you have scholars such as Edward Said, Baba, and Spivak. They all talk about this. And so it presents contemporary issues and the context surrounding it in a rich manner. You understand it more a bit. Um, you have the othering, the psychological colonization, and external colonization in terms of policies, um, permanently settling in a spot because the land is supposedly terra nullius, and then the natives are backwards. The natives, you dehumanize them because they don't belong there, and they're lesser beings than us. So this constant dehumanization happened in the past. You can see Scramble for Africa, um, where you have this pseudoscience saying that, oh, blacks have certain figures and shapes, whites have certain figures and shapes, so they're like more superior and so on. So now there's also that internalization where colonial authorities in propaganda, in education, they try to make the natives act more like them. So like this internalization saying that, oh, if we become like our colonizers, we're more sophisticated, we're more advanced, we're more literary. So let's become like our colonial masters. Let's talk like them, let's act like them, and so on and so forth, right? And so it's sort of like there's this epistemic violence. So all the knowledge, all the narratives, all the know-how of the natives is deconstructed, is devalued, is destroyed in favor of the um, prevailing dominant colonial superpowers narrative, right? So power of some states to construct the narrative. So Cox said, Robert Cox, theory is always for someone for some purpose. So major state actors and their domineering ways of looking at stuff. So for example, why can Israel have nuclear power, nuclear weapons compared to other countries in the Middle East? Is it because some states can be trusted with nuclear weapons while others cannot? Is it because some states are less rational, less developed? So why does Israel get to have nuclear weapons and others? So there's this inherent colonial propaganda that still lingers even today. It's like Palestinians are dehumanized. Um, they were never there. The land has always belonged to the Jews because some book 2,000 years ago said so. It's all biblical rhetoric. So it's like it's exactly just like in the 16th, 17th, 18th century where you have God, gospel, and glory, dehumanizing of the natives, and so on. And like in the Americas, right? So we can actually see that parallels in Israel, and it's ongoing. That's why a lot of people have been arguing that Israel is actually a settler colony state, ongoing right now, in live in 21st century. So like in the past, we haven't been able to see it. There's no social media. It wasn't well documented. We don't know how many Native Americans were destroyed. There's a study saying that 56 million have been killed in the conquering of Americas, 56 million people. But of course, they've been almost extinct now, very minuscule population in US, for example. And only then do they start to appreciate, oh, we got to give you some native land title quota and act because they feel sorry, right? They're trying to have that affirmative action. But before this, we weren't able to see it under the veil of history and lack of documentation, right? So we don't know what other atrocities were committed. I want to go back, by the way, to the Israeli foreign policy. Also, there's this let's not forget about Israeli military censorship. So there's massive censorship going on about which to publish in Israel. That's why Israel doesn't allow journalists to come in Gaza and so on. So and that's why when Iranian missiles hit, there was a lot of censorship going on. Oh, like be careful, don't show this picture, don't show this picture. So that's part of their doctrine as well. Um, okay, so now this is actually what I'm trying to say. So the book on the left, Palestine in Israeli School Books, Ideology, it's actually written by an Israeli. You can see this colonial narrative going for decades in Israeli education system, news, mainstream media. That's why if you're an Israeli, you grew up buying this, consuming this. Palestinians, like you've always been there, even though a lot of Israelis, they don't have any ties with Israel, with the land. They've been living for centuries, for millennia in Europe, right? Ashkenazi Jews. So the colonization of Palestine, they're trying to manufactured that threat that Palestine is out to get them and destroy them, and trying to relate it with historical narratives like Holocaust, because like even though the colonization of Palestine actually began way before the Holocaust, way before World War, like Balfour Declaration, they began in 1900s, right? Way before World War Three, sorry, World War Two, way before the Holocaust. So the slow colonization of Palestine by Zionist militias, by Zionist settlers, have begun way before the Holocaust happened. So it's only when the Holocaust happened, it became more convenient, but also because refugees started pouring in to escape uh, persecution from the Nazis and so on. So they then migrated and settled in Palestine. I mean, obviously, there were Jews that were already living in Palestine during the Ottoman era, but they lived in harmony side by side, right? So there's no massive expulsion, massive displacement of Palestinians. So it's only natural when you have an alien population coming in and trying to dispossess you that you try to fight back and resist. So obviously, because of a lot of lobby groups before US, France provided Israel with a lot of military equipment to be successful in the 1960 war, 1967 war, and so on. So a lot of lobby groups, influential Zionist groups in European countries poured money, poured support. They had implemented like a Jewish land fund, Jewish land agency to bring in settlers to populate the area, slowly at the expense of the natives, right? So and this ideology continues irrespective of who's the leader in education. So you can have a look at this and Ilan Pop also. Yeah. And so let's just look at examples of former settler colonies in Anglosphere, because this echoes a lot of what we see in Israel today. Okay, you can look at United States. I don't know if you can see. Can you see my mouse? Thumbs up. You can see my mouse. Okay. Subjugated people, Native Americans, status of natives, near extermination. But republic, equal rights, right? So result outcome, equal rights. So when people have been saying Israel is democracy, it's not a democracy, because in IR theory, liberal democracy, what does it entail? Liberal democracy, one of the key components is equality. There is no equality between Palestinians and Israelis. So what do they want? So they're occupying Palestine. Uh, they're not preventing Palestine to have a state of their own. So what is it that they want? Do they want to have one Israel where Palestine and Israelis live side by side equally? They don't want that. They want Jewish supremacy. Or do they want Palestinians to have their own state? They don't want that. They want Jewish supremacy. So because if you look at it, Israeli demographics, Israel is 10 million population, right? There are roughly around 70% of Israeli population is Jewish Israelis. That's 7 million. And there are 3 million Palestinians or Arab Israelis, right? And then in the occupied territories, the West Bank and Gaza, cumulatively, there's 5 million Palestinians. So 5 plus 3, 7. So there's 7 million Palestinians with 7 million Jewish Israelis. So it's half. It's half. So that's why they don't want one state, because they just want to keep their hold onto that, like the occupying power on West Bank and Gaza. They want to keep their stronghold on, like strong occupying force on it, because they don't want Palestinians to ever have their own state, because otherwise it will shift the balance of the demographics, right? It's going to make it equal. It's going to make Jewish not the dominant society anymore, the majority anymore. So reversal affirmative action. You have Australia, white Australia policy, Aboriginals, new extermination, Aboriginal land rights laws. So you have all of this that's happened before, but it's been reversed to some degree with affirmative action policies, meaning that policies to reverse colonial injustices. So you see this. You see Native American land rights, federal Indian law, and um, American federal laws, Aboriginal land rights and laws, but you don't see that yet in Israel, because they just want to keep perpetuating that colonial enterprise. Okay. Um, uh, okay. So here, um, no state, perpetual conflict, no affirmative action, unrecognized, whitewashed. Okay. It's ongoing. That's the root cause. Okay, so let's look at the colonization process chart. settler colony, colonization efforts, decolonization process. So, like the winds of change speech, the decolonization of Africa slowly. So, either you gain independence, you become a republic with minority rights and quotas, you become a republic with equal rights in the process of decolonization, or you become autonomous regions, or the conflict is ongoing, continues, right? So, and of course, decolonization process near extinction or depletion of indigenous population. So, Palestinians, they've been fighting for so long. They've been trying to resist this. So they're nowhere near extinct yet. So that's why it's so difficult for Israel right now, because they're probably, if this was like a progress chart, they're probably like here in the middle. So they're still trying to continue that. Because what other option there is? If you don't want to give Palestinians their own state, then absorb them, make them Israelis, but give them equal rights. They don't want that, right? So then give Palestinians their own state, but they don't want that as well. So all this rhetoric about Palestinians not accepting, you can imagine why before in the past that why would you accept, why would you concede so much when you were the original settlers there? You were the indigenous there. So a lot of these Israelis, like if you look at Benjamin Netanyahu, they're Ashkenazi, Milikowski from Poland, from Belarus, from Ukraine. They don't have any real ties with the land. They've been living in Europe for centuries. So you have a lot of these. Imagine some settler in Brooklyn can just go in and settle and buy land and consider himself Israeli with full rights, as opposed to a Palestinian. That's why you have that Jacob, right? If I don't steal it, someone else will, because it is true. It's like white Australia's white policy. Okay, so I don't know if I should go into this. I'll go to this later. Okay, where's my? Okay, so I'll just go into this real quickly. So now, also in post-colonial theory, right, is this notion of sovereignty and independence. And you've heard of world systems theory, right? World systems theory that talks about exploitation of the periphery by the colonial center, by the metropole, the metropolitan state. So, for example, UK and its empire, UK was the metropolitan state, and its colonies were the periphery. And you have France and its colonies, and Portugal, whatever, and its colonies. So France, for example, they all built these. They have their colonies for exploitation, for subjugation of the natives, so that they can send back resources to the motherland, right? And then the colonies also serve as markets. So sort of like imperialism, empire, and so on. But with colonies, permanent settlers, and with imperialism, it's more about ruling, but they don't permanently settle there, right? So they just rule from far away, remote territories. Um, so that's why you see that a lot of like colonial powers, they try to build infrastructure um, for the colonies, like transportation networks. But in hindsight, in reality, it's actually not just for the natives. It's for exploitation, transfer of goods and services to the metropole. So just because the British in the past, they built railroads, they built transportation networks, they built public services infrastructure, it's just to facilitate colonization. It's never really genuinely for the purpose of the natives. So, I mean, some colonial powers have uh, colonies have like are really good compared to others, but ultimately they're trying to ship resources back, right? And of course, you have this decolonization process happen in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. A lot of countries gained independence, or a lot of the colonial powers were kicked out. So then you have that reversal going on, right? So then people start realizing, okay, colonization is not good. They have come to that awareness, and they're trying to have this sort of like reconciliation. So why why is world systems theory, metropole, periphery important? So if we look, right, in a way, it can be applied to our understanding of why Palestinians can never become a state, right? Israel is the occupying power, it is the metropole. Palestine is the periphery. So as long as the metropole is not willing to let go of the periphery, Palestine will never gain independence, will never become a state. That's why if you look at Britain, um, and it's either through force that they let go, like civil wars or revolution, violent overthrow, or the colonial powers get kicked out, but it's really hard to imagine that in case of Palestine Israel. The metropolitan country has to let go of that, but they're not. So like Britain has willingly gave independence in the name of decolonization to a lot of countries because they wanted that themselves. They wanted that. They wanted to give independence to a lot of countries. They know that it's not popular anymore. We have to pull out. We cannot hold on to that. So Indian gained independence before there was a British Raj because British wanted to. It could have held on to it, just like Portugal tried to hold on to Goa, but they were kicked out by Indian military, right? And if you look at even Malaysia with Singapore, right? Malaysia could have held on to Singapore for a long time, but Malaysia, as the metropolitan, it stayed on, and it because of various reasons, of course. I'm simplifying, but Malaysia let go of Singapore, meaning that Singapore gained independence because Malaysia willingly wanted to let go of Singapore. Just like with regards to Timor Leste and Indonesia, even though Indonesia was suffering a lot of international pressure, it could have hold on to Timor Leste for a long time because it was the dominant power. It was so close, it could have fight, it could have stayed on, but Indonesian parliament accepted and acknowledged and wanted to let go in 1999 of Timor Leste. Indonesia could have just hold on and it could have been protracted, right? So Indonesia, as the core, held on to that. Just like if you look at um, China and Taiwan, China doesn't want to let go of Taiwan, so Taiwan will never gain independence. Just like Israel doesn't want to let go of Palestine, even though it's occupying them, Palestine will never gain independence. So this is the thing that I'm trying to convey. So a lot of these things we can have a better understand of it through post-colonial studies, um, which is really quite interesting. And of course, if you look at apartheid South Africa and Israel, I hope not being too long. There's still time, right? Yeah. So apartheid South Africa and in Israel. Why did apartheid South Africa fail? Just focus on the highlighted ones. Um, they had very weak lobby groups. They had lobby groups to advocate for white South Africa, for apartheid South Africa, like even in Congress. But just a minority. It wasn't as strong as the IPAC or pro-Israel lobby. So strong, even among evangelicals, among born-again Christians that are like Zionist Christians. You have Christians Unite for Israel and IPAC and so on. So like there's this a lot of Judeo-Christian values, rhetoric spewed in favor of Israel and so on. So very strong lobby. And foreign aid and support, substantial U.S. military and economic aid. U.S. is a permanent UN Security Council member, legitimizing narratives. So apartheid South Africa is weak because it's not grounded on powerful historical, theological, biblical references, right? So like with Israel, you can easily claim, oh, because the Torah said this, or the Bible said this. Because biblical Israel is not the same as modern day Israel. Of course not. People don't know that. Like the average evangelicals, probably they can't even tell the difference between Iran or Iraq, right? So a lot of they just buy things that are easily consumed, and these pro Israel lobby, they know their audience, so they try to make it sound good. And but if you know history, then you know it's more nuanced than that. So UN Security Council, UK provides. So it's really funny because you know how when talking about veto power, which is a big stumbling block, we got to remove the veto system somehow. UK and a lot of other Western countries actually voted in favor of apartheid South Africa by vetoing any resolutions that was against apartheid South Africa. So UK did that in the 1980s and so on. And then you have consistent US vetoes to protect Israel from UN resolutions. So this like, and also you could say internal resistance, strong mass-based internal anti-apartheid resistant movements. So um, because it's difficult because in apartheid South Africa, it was minority ruled by the whites. They didn't have any, they tried to have immigration policies to bring in more whites, but there were an exodus of white people fleeing from South Africa as well, because they wanted better opportunities in Europe and elsewhere. But in Israel, you have this massive, massive program. Oh, you have like bringing students from Israel, from United States to Israel, trying to like populate it. Oh, if you're Jewish or have Jewish heritage, you can get Israeli citizenship. So this Aliyah movement. Right. Okay. So now I just want to show you conflict escalation and de-escalation. Right. So this is actually from Professor Lise Howard of Georgetown University, drawn on from inspiration from Berkovich. So this is conflict escalation and de-escalation, and ongoing, why it's unresolved. So I have to show you this first so that later you can understand my chart. Okay. So Ukraine, pro-Russian, Ukrainian separatists, right? So originally at level 1, it was Ukraine versus pro-Russian Ukrainian separatists. But this is a dyadic relationship. It's very asymmetric. It's unbalanced, right? So who does the pro-Russian Ukrainian separatists seek help from? They seek help from Russia, because then it becomes a very much symmetric relationship yet again. Ukraine cannot take on Russia alone, right? So who do they seek help from? The West. Then it becomes more balanced than like dyadic relationship. So this is level, but to solve level 3, you need to solve the root cause. The root cause is this: pro-Russian Ukrainian separatists. Now, this is obviously simplified and reductionist, but that's this what I wanted to show you. Okay, so this is multiple levels of conflict, if we look at this. Present day in status quo. Okay, now I'm not trying to say that everything is Israel, like Israel, but I just want you to see in the context specifically of Israel-Palestinian conflict, you can see it right now, present day, right? So it goes upwards. So tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So tier 3 is more macro, wide scale. You pull out a bit. Tier 1, tier 2 is micro. So I'll just follow along with me, bear with me. Let's look at tier 1. Level 1, Israel, Palestinians. So Israel is in conflict with the Palestinians. Why? Because of what I told you, history, their own state, their own rights, and so on. So it becomes asymmetric in this dyadic relationship. Palestinians, they're weak. Who can, like, it's been ongoing because of strong Jewish lobbies, Israeli military power, propaganda, and so on. So, and then you have all these other groups that try to help the Palestinians, right? So Israel has this conflict with them. But then it becomes asymmetric also because they're weak. Israel is strong. Then you have Iran coming in, but then Iran and Israel, it's asymmetric because long term, Iran can definitely last and they can definitely hold on to their own in terms of war of attrition with Israel. Israel economy would probably collapse. You already see that they don't have a lot of Iron Dome missiles left to defend themselves. So they need constant West support. So they appeal to the West, right? So this is tier 1. Tier 1. So if you want to solve the West's conflict with Iran, you have to go to the root cause. What is the root cause? Even if they say, okay, just buy out their bluff. Because the Houthis have already said that we will stop sending rockets to you if you stop your genocide. Simple as that, right? Then stop your genocide. Call them, test them. Are the Houthis really true? Okay, then stop your genocide. But no, Israel doesn't want to. It's the genocide on the Gazans is ongoing. You can see how Israel, if it really wanted to, it could probably rescue its hostages. Because if you look at how the way they bombed Iran, with the amount of intelligence they have, imagine they have this intelligence, supreme intelligence to go inside Iran, know, like send drones, send Mossad cells inside Iran, but they cannot do that in Gaza to find hostages. So it's sort of like it's counterintuitive. They have all this intelligence about Iran, but they don't know where their hostages are. It's hard to believe the narrative, but obviously we don't want to resort to conspiracy too much. But it's just you start to ask these questions yourself. And then tier 2, Israel has this conflict with Palestinians. It also has its conflict with Arab neighbors, Lebanon, Syria. It's like trying to portray themselves manufactured threat, constantly in a state of conflict because it's artificially manufactured to legitimize their aggression, right? To legitimize their aggression, their military superiority, their capability, and so on. Because the threat is there, perpetual warfare is there to constantly legitimize their rhetoric. So, but then Israel has already made peace with a lot of the Arab neighbors, Egypt, Jordan, and like Gulf countries, and so on, and UAE, whatever. So it doesn't have any enemies left. How can it sustain its rhetoric if it doesn't have any enemies left? If it doesn't have any enemies left, then it only has what? Lebanon. So it continues to create threat, create conflict, continues to create conflict. to buy into its more right-wing cabinet and coalition, especially in Netanyahu's ruling regime. So, and then it continues to invade and bomb Syria. All of this notion that all the Arab states want to get them, even though Hamas didn't exist in 1980s, before, like, and then it was propped up by Israel as well. And so, and you can see that recently Israel actually funded and provided weapons to um, uh, militias that are against Hamas in Gaza, right? Just to cause instability, ferment discord, and so on. And let's not forget the Israel-Lebanon war, how they supported the militias. And so then Israel, with Arab neighbors, they seek to appeal to the West because, oh, please help us because everyone's out to get us. We're fighting a war on 7 fronts. That's just some of them that you started first, of course, with your constant violation of the airspace and sovereignty, extraterritorial killing. So, and then now they portray it as Israel is part of the West, the only democracy in the Middle East versus the Muslim world. So then this narratives shift because they don't have any ammunition, shift from root cause being Palestinians, they shift to us versus them, like this Muslim rhetoric against the Muslim terrorism and so on, right? War on terror. That's why you see Netanyahu has said in a quote that, oh, if you remove Iraq, you remove Saddam Hussein from power, that he can guarantee that there will be positive reverberations and implications in the region will be super positive, right? Look what happened. ISIS came in, refugee crisis, instability, and then just like with Libya. So all of this rhetoric, just to pursue Israeli interests in the Middle East ongoing. And I'm not saying that it's all because of Israel. There are some genuine uh, other threats, like during the time of Saddam when they invaded Kuwait and so on. So, but we have to know the nuances. We have to be wary of certain nations' ideological interests, right, and propaganda and so on. So we have to look between the lines, be nuanced about it. So let's go to tier three. So, like I said, West with the Muslim world, that's why you see a lot of campus protests in American universities and major cities around the world, in the Western world. They've protests, pro-Palestinian protests, and they're labeling it as um, like trying to paint it as a very pro-Hamas supporters, pro-terrorist supporters, and so on. It's like us versus them, Muslim world. They're out to get us, and so on. So it's like that slow shift of narrative because they're desperate. They don't have anything to cling on to because more and more people are aware of Israeli atrocities, and Israel is becoming ever more so unpopular in the global world. So they're trying to shift that. They're trying to figure out new ways of how to fight this anti-Israel sentiment, even though they'll blame anyone but themselves. So it's very difficult in that sense. So and then tier three, level one, and of course I'm saying this not to like paint a broad brush, Inspector. You have a lot of very pro-Israeli Jewish voices, Jewish activists, Jewish writers that are in favor of Palestine. They've worked so hard tremendously. So this is an issue with Israeli government, because by global standards, you can see that entire Israeli society is right wing by global standards, because majority of them voted for expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, and majority of them supported Netanyahu's incursion in Iran because we cannot really blame them because they've been bought by they've consumed Israeli propaganda for decades, right? And the Israeli minorities in them that try to fight against this, they're demonized as well, disowned by their family and attacked, harassed, and so on. So it's really difficult in Israel to fight this rhetoric, especially when there's like media bans, censorship, and so on. So if you go out tier three, Israel, Palestinians, level two, Israel versus all this, and then West, non-Muslim, pro-Palestinian, critical of Israel voices, right? And when I say West versus Muslim world, there are some like really, I mean, there are like what Assad has been doing, in terms of killing Syrians and all that. So we cannot forget that also. So I'm just trying to not to portray as Israel the sole problem, but in this specific context, because we're focusing on the Israel-Palestinian issue, that's why I'm painting it as Israel. So I'm not saying that Muslim world is saint. No, but in this specific context, so just so that we can see the trajectory, the bigger picture. So okay, so now we look at Netanyahu, right? Longest running prime minister, fragile coalition, ultra right wing. So he's been prime minister in Israel for 17 years, the longest ever. He has unpopular judicial reforms, more authoritarian. All the protests ongoing in Israel is not because they're in favor of Palestinians. Um, Maybe some are, but it's more because they don't like Netanyahu. But they'll be happy to continue with the genocide in Palestine or with the apartheid system in the West Bank, right? And that sort of like dehumanization of Palestinians, they'll be happy to continue with that. This ICC warrant, ICJ case. So we look at foreign policy making theoretical lenses, just quickly go through it. Rational actor model, organizational behavior model two, governmental politics model three. So both is valid in explaining Israeli foreign policy responses, right? So model one looks at cost benefit analysis. What are the state's ultimate goals and objectives, and how can they best achieve that, maximize their utility without consequences? So best choice, right? So for example, uh, like let's say Gaza, right? The Gaza issue. So Hamas did that incursion into Israel, and then they kill Israelis, right? 1,200. So, what's the rational actor model would see that, okay, Israel has got to do something because it looks at state level. It cannot just sit there. It's got to do something. It's got to portray itself to its allies and its domestic population as strong as doing something and not weak, right? It's got to do something. So, what does it do? Of course, that's what we see now. And then for us looking at why it struck Iran, we go to Model 3 because it best explains governmental politics. So, government action is the result of bargaining of players in the game. Who are the players? You have Netanyahu, you have his right wing cabinet coalitions, you have the people, you have his intelligence advisors, defense ministers, and so on. So they're working out. So it's bargaining. And then Netanyahu has the more sway, has more influential power, decides on the final say, and he has his own stakes, preferences, goals, objectives. But he's competing with all these other forces. Because remember what we already talked about, he has all this ongoing with him, right? All this issue going on with him. And so he has to think during the time, just a day before, Israeli parliament actually narrowly saved them. Ruling coalition, the government actually saved themselves from the parliament having dissolved narrowly, right? Because the right wing ultra orthodox party that is in Netanyahu's ruling coalition threatened to leave and break up the coalition, right? And he needs them. He needs them. So that's why he's working with all this right wing coalition, right wing people, because he wants to maintain in power, right? And he's in constant struggle because some of the policies that the ultra orthodox want is not in line with the majority of Israelis. For example, they want policies such as they want to be exempted from mandatory conscription for Haredi ultra orthodox Jews, so that they don't have to serve in the IDF, right? But then this is highly unpopular because you need numbers in the IDF. You need numbers because of on their ongoing militarized stance and behavior. You need numbers. So it's like this bargaining. So because of this, he needs that constant warfare for, in a way, to suit himself, to delay his eventual uh, domestic political issues, sort of like to rally everyone behind him for popularity points. There's an election coming up in Israel in October, so you have the election campaigning starting soon, election season in Israel. So there's competing shared goals, interests, and perceptions and preferences that he has to juggle with, especially with his right-wing ministers like Bezalel Smotrich, Ben Gvir, right? That calls for the extermination of Palestinians and so on. So you can see that governmental politics bargaining. So just like this actually derived from Graham Allison of how he looked at the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Nikita Khrushchev and Kennedy, they had to contend with their own political elites and military advisors and so on as to what's the best course of action. right? So, and then you can see this. It's applicable to what we're seeing in Israel, and also if we apply to Iran, if we apply to Iran, we can more or less use the same theory as well. So you have Iranian leadership, and usually when a country is attacked, they'll forget about everything. They'll rally behind the leader, rally behind the country. They'll forget about any political issues. So that same goes for Israel as well. So Israel needed to do something, needed a distraction factor. So that's why they, my opinion, that they went to strike Iran first, even though in good faith or not, Iran was in the sixth talk. Iran and US was in the their six nuclear talks. So they were engaging in diplomacy, but then Israel went ahead. So I do feel that um, Trump was genuinely mad about that because I don't think Trump was quite happy with that because the US went in good faith. Remember, Trump was the one who removed the JCPOA because he wanted to undo all of the policies that the previous Obama administration did. So JCPOA was a huge win for the West, at least, because it sought peace. So Israel doesn't want peace with Iran, but JCPOA came to an agreement where Iran wouldn't be allowed to have nuclear weapons. It was like for peaceful means and so on, but it was in place. It was a framework, uh, and it was agreed upon by all the major powers. Um, so usually when you have a mediator that is a major power, UN permanent member of UN Security Council, usually the ceasefire would come through. Yeah, usually, most of the time. So, but then he went to undo that. So, for whatever reason, for egotistical reason, so he undid that. Israel was very unhappy. Maybe from Israeli lobby as well. Israel was very unhappy with the JCPOA because they need Iran as a source of enemy, as a boogeyman, as because otherwise they see that U.S. foreign policy is slowly disengaging from Middle East, focusing more towards East Asia. So then they will be left alone. If U.S. make peace with Iran, Israel's strategic interests and might not be as valuable or as important in American foreign policy agenda. So they needed that. I'm gonna end soon. Okay, so this is just my last slide. Strong pro-Israeli foreign policy decision-making theoretical lenses. So perpetual conflict to legitimize one's standing, right? You need to make yourself look good because when your very foundation is rooted in violence, pros like Zionist militias groups, terrorists that expel the native populations, Palestinians, and Nakba, you need perpetual conflict. You need to have that because otherwise your whole enterprise is going to come crumbling down. So you need an enemy, constant enemy. You need a constant threat. Mhm. Strong pro-Israel lobby groups, Congress, media, companies, influential billionaires, influential Zionists, Christian Zionists, Trump presidency, and then you have okay. So now in terms of this, I'm very pessimistic about this, but I feel like if we want to resolve this, there needs to be strong action, which has been done in the past. If we look at I think you guys can read up about it. I'm not going to touch too deep about it and too much, but it's very interesting. You cut trade with Israel. If you look at Azerbaijan, for example, Azerbaijan is a member of the OIC, but it supplies 60% of Israeli oil and gas needs. 60%. Azerbaijan. Can you imagine that? Azerbaijan, I mean, of course, you have Nigeria, you have Gabon, and you have like all these other countries, you have Brazil. But Azerbaijan is a part of the OIC. I don't know what they're doing. Of course, Israel has ties with, if you look at the military equipment and supplies in Tunisia and Morocco, their military assets include Israeli drones. So they've bought Israeli equipment. I mean, it's all about business, I guess. But if I would say, if Azerbaijan, someone can influence Azerbaijan to cut uh, the energy supply to Israel, because it's not by sea, it's by pipeline. It goes through Turkey. I think it will cripple the Israeli economy. 60% is a lot. So, but it's difficult. I don't know. That's just my go-to reference because I feel like Azerbaijan is quite important in this, especially when you're cutting off energy supplies. Israel doesn't have a lot of natural resources. Um, it has some oil fields, but yeah. So it could work. And also in terms of like Arab neighbors, I'm actually not quite sure, like UAE and all that. I have no idea what's going on. They might have been trying to work behind the scenes, but I don't know. Like this denormalization is like still at the expense of the Palestinians, like the normalization of the Arab countries. They have to call it normalization, even though like they're on with the ongoing genocide, ongoing displacement, dispossession of Palestinians, demolishing of Palestinian homes. And another thing that I would like to look at is if there could be another AOE, Arab oil embargo. It has worked and happened in the past 1970s. And it actually influenced Israel to reach an agreement and to pull out of Sinai, right? Because they invaded Sinai, but then they suffered losses from Egyptian forces. They managed to get pushed back a bit, but they wanted to continue the war. But the OPEC states came together, and the Arab states started cutting off oil supply. And then oil's prices of petrol oil increased tremendously in the Western states, the Western world, tremendously. People were waiting, like there's lots of cars waiting, queuing out from empty petrol stations because they couldn't get fuel because of the Arab oil embargo. They came together, they united, they put a stop in it, and they prevented oil from reaching or cutting the supply of oil from reaching the Western states because sort of like a political like weaponization try to force Israel to stop what it was doing. So of course because of this the Western world learned from its lessons and tried to diversify. But we have yet to see another Arab oil embargo happen because of this against Israel. So wishful thinking, like I said, um, like I showed you with this one, right? And of course, the other things. Uh, Um, change must come within Israel. It must come within Israel, the way I can see it, or international pressure, but it needs to be super strong international pressure. So it needs to be because Israel would need to willingly give up Palestine from themselves. That's to come. It's difficult to change them because they always see themselves, Palestinians, as subhumans, second class, always this threat because of the educational propaganda and so on. Or there needs to be a stop of American lobby groups influencing American foreign policy. Yeah, so I hope I didn't talk too much. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, thank you, everyone. If you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Danny, for the thought-provoking lecture. This has really given us a lot to think about the complex dynamics of the Israel-Palestine and the broader Middle East conflict, as well as the strategic consideration shaping regional stability and future peace efforts. By the way, Mr. Danny, is it okay with you if we extend like 10 or to 15 minutes until around 8:50 p.m. New Zealand time to accommodate
Yeah,
the
sure.
Q&A session?
I'm so sorry for dragging it longer
No,
than
it's
it
okay.
should be.
It's okay. Now let's open the floor to question. Please feel free to press the raise your hand button on the Zoom or just type in the Q&A box or chat box, and we will call on you to ask your question. Let's just keep the question brief and to the point so we can cover as much ground as possible.
Yes, Gio.
Hi, yeah, Serene. Just want to talk about Netanyahu. He has
Yeah.
been described through the lens of realist international relations theory due to his emphasis of security, power, and national interests as the key drivers of state behavior. And also, I think you mentioned about the wishful thinking, the internal changes within Israel, and if I'm not mistaken, the next election will be on by October 26. I was wondering, do you think Israel's stance toward Palestine and its broader Middle East policies will become softer if Netanyahu were no longer in power and his coalitions?
Yeah, good question, Gio. Um, I think so. I think so. I think maybe there'll be a lull. There'll be some period of peace. Um, but I feel like the settlements will continue. That's not going to change. That's constant. That's a good question. And I feel like because the whole Israeli society is militarized. So IDF, joining the IDF is seen as a rite of passage, as something to be celebrated, something that is cool. Um, and if you join the IDF, you must need an enemy. You must need to defend yourself. You must need this threat. The Because I just cannot see like how are you going to remove 700,000 people from the West Bank, and all these people they're armed, they're fanatical, right wing, and 700,000 people. That's like almost twice the population of Brunei. Brunei is like 400,000 something. That's a lot of people in the occupied Palestinian West Bank. So yeah, maybe there'll be a bit, but I just cannot see because even the Israeli opposition, Yair Lapid, they call him the opposition, but he's not really an opposition because he always seems to be agreeing with Netanyahu, and he doesn't really criticize that much. It's not so when you talk about Israeli opposition, they don't really do much opposing, you know. So it's yeah. So I cannot see any replacement towards Netanyahu that's more critical other than the old establishment. Yeah, maybe things will change, hopefully.
Yes, hopefully. Thank you, Mr. Red.
So we also got a question in the chat box from the Noah Fitri. He asked regarding on Abraham Accord. Does Trump did that for the sake of Israeli security?
Abraham Accord. Yeah, yeah, you could say that. I guess there was some. So in on the Israeli side, not all of the people on the Israeli side they want perpetual war. You have some really extremist war hawks, and you have some war doves that just want safety of Israel. But I feel like um, there was some influence in that regard in terms of like they wanted to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, right? So it was ongoing. It was about to come about, and probably the Saudis they must have had some uh, requirements or something like okay, you gotta give more recognition to Palestinian plights or something. We don't know what goes on behind the scenes. Um, but yeah, I think definitely because with regards to Middle East policy, there's a lot of uh, Israeli lobbyists. Yeah, so Israel is never sidelined in that regard unless Trump feels like he should be. They should be. Just like in the ceasefire, where I think Trump really put his foot down and said that okay, you have Israeli jets come back, you know? So yeah.
There's also a question like how Abraham Accord can give a great impact to the Muslim world. On what reason Israel need the Abraham Accord for the security purpose if they already have US as their backbone support? And also, does this mean the US try to convince the Muslim countries need to normalize the tie with Israel?
Okay, yeah. So honestly, I actually don't know um why why the Muslim countries actually accepted the Abraham Accords with the US. I feel like in that specific context is more about national interest. Like if you see a lot of the Gulf countries, they have a lot of US air bases, US military equipment, so it's all about their own survival. So in that regard, I think that they don't really take Palestinian issues as a priority other than just maybe some aid, some funding, some donations. Um, I feel like it's just all about maintaining their regime in terms of their monarchy. Um, so in favor of security, right? Probably US is probably like, okay, we'll give you more security guarantees for your monarchy, for your political system, for your security if you normalize with Israel. Probably, yeah. So backdoor, I don't really know what the contents and the details of that, like backdoor negotiations, probably. But if you see that there's a lot of military equipment given by the United States to Saudi Arabia, air bases there, Qatar, Bahrain, and then UAE, and then Oman as well. Um, so yeah, actually, sometimes I'm just actually baffled as well as to the lack of support from the Arab leaders on Palestinians. Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm sorry, I don't know beyond that.
And we also have last from the participant. One of the main reasons why Palestine has not yet been able to achieve their goal of liberation. And if one day they can fully reconcile it, do you feel optimistic that Palestine can achieve this status? Hello, Mr. Danny. We have a slightly a technical problem.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Yeah, okay. My apologies. My internet got disconnected. Okay, so I don't know if you caught what I was saying. So I feel I'm a bit pessimistic about this because I feel it's just out of from the typical colonial strategy and propaganda of divide and conquer from the Israeli side. So they've always trying to split the Palestinians up. They don't want them to be united. So this is just typical divide and conquer tactics from the colonial playbook. Um, they always want to keep the Palestinians not unified. But of course, when you have major conflicts such as this, Palestinians don't. I don't feel like they really care about uh, like their ideological differences because they're just at the end of the day resisting Israeli occupation. So I'm optimistic about that if they stay united in West Bank, ongoing demolition of Palestinian homes. So uh, and you don't really see this discussion on oh, Fatah does this, oh, Hamas does this. But then you see that one time when Abbas said that, Abbas said something that just give them the hostages or something. So I don't know what's wrong with Abbas. I feel like he doesn't really know the extent of what, or maybe he's trying to, he he's trying to like put an end to this, and he sees no other way. So he sees like it's the end. What else can we do? So he's very pessimistic. So it's difficult because they both share the same occupier and they both want the same thing. So I don't know, like I don't know if Palestine can achieve statehood unless unless we change the veto system, unless there's more sanctions on Israel, and unless, like I said, Arab oil embargo 2.0 or Azerbaijan cuts oil supplies, some real meaningful, not just rhetoric, not just saying against international law, blah blah blah, and some more concrete actions by the Arab world, like more concrete, like Azerbaijan. But Azerbaijan is not Arab world; it's OIC. Maybe UAE can do something. So yeah, just like because the way I see it, Israeli society is never going to change. It has this right wing mentality and ongoing in them. It's still instilled in them by the media, their education system. So yeah, that's why if you see an Israeli, they'll always see Palestinians as like the threat, and they don't really. It's hard for them to put themselves in Palestinian shoes. Yeah.
We also have a lot more questions. It is from the Arik Zakri. Could you comment on Arab Israel who are citizens of Israel? Like they are a large minority and they are Knesset members. What is their role in stopping the genocide and are they suppressed? And also the second question being is in the geopolitical Muslim world, What is the reaction of the Sunni nation to the fact that the Shias are doing the heavy lifting to help Palestine? And the last one is there is a stereotype that Middle East countries support or allow to happen the genocide because they are monarchies. Like, what is the Turkey excuse?
Okay, good question, brother Arik. Really good. Okay, so in terms of number one, yeah, so this is the main argument that Israelis always throw around, saying that, oh, we're democracy, we have Arab Israelis, they're in the parliament and stuff. So there's 2 million Arabs in Israel, but it's still there's still that racial discrimination, still second-class citizens. So that's why when you see that Ayman Odeh, the Israeli MP, Arab, he cannot really do much. Very weak, minority fringe party, death threats here and there. So he's received a lot of death threats. And when you in terms of like Arab Israelis, there isn't that much cultural power influence in Israel, and also time. Um, there's really not that much they can do other than voice out, because otherwise, if the entire Israeli population want to turn on them, it's like this. And then, of course, I think the security would probably just turn a blind eye, right? It's just like a thorn, and it's more for like a quota, for like just to fill the quota, diversity, hire something like that. So I feel like he's trying to do his best, but it's more like just tokenism. They don't really take him seriously. Suppression of his voice, his freedom, and so on. So yeah, this is in my opinion. Uh, so what they can do is just because especially in Israeli society where the entire population is right wing by global standards, as compared to global standards, there's not a lot that you can do other than just voice, is join protests here and there. There are some NGOs that want peace in Israel, some anti-war protesters, but they're very minority. Yeah, they don't have a lot of weight. You've seen it, right? You've seen like protests at the entrance where the humanitarian aid truck convoy came. So you have like supporters came to prevent the humanitarian trucks from coming in. Can you imagine? Like like just try to prevent, because they feel that it's going to go to Hamas, and then also you have all these ongoing fanaticals that like really want the war to continue. They don't care about Palestinians. So in terms of okay, I'll go to your third question first, right? So Turkey. So I feel like Turkey. We have to realize that before Turkey had that Marmara flotilla. So they have NGOs, they have that humanitarian aid. They try to do as much as they can. They have that rhetoric, but they're a member of NATO. They're aligned with the West. It's difficult for them to really do anything meaningful without damaging their security relations. However, I feel like with regards to Israel's relationship with Russia, right? So it's sort of like hedging, because Russia has been very vocal and critical of Israeli actions, especially recently when they attacked Iran. So Russia has been condemning Israeli actions. Israel is very cautious in their relationship with Russia. That's why they didn't complain about Ukraine being invaded by Russia. So they need Russia as a counterweight to uh, Turkey. So Israel needs Russia as a counterweight to Turkey in the region. So that's why they like, when Russia was in Syria, they just okay, fine, because they felt like Russia could serve as a counterweight to Turkey in the region. When Russia pulled out, Syria is gone. They're afraid that Iran or Turkey might fill the vacuum, especially when you have growing U.S. disengagement from the U.S. From the Middle East. But definitely Turkey could have done more, could be doing more. Um, Turkey has this pipeline running through them from Azerbaijan to Israel, running through Turkey's territory. They could probably cut that. Turkey has already actually they've cut off, I think, exports or imports to Israel. They've cut that. The only OIC nation to have done that, I think, but they could be doing more, definitely. Um, and number two, what is the reaction of Sunni nations to the fact that the Shias are doing the heavy lifting to help Palestinians? That's a very good question. So I think, um, especially we can see, which is really quite fascinating in this in Israelis' attacks on Iran, you don't have that Sunni Shiite sectarianism anymore. Like the entire Muslim world was united. Even the Sunnis, they criticized why Israel was invading Iran or was bombing Iran. Um, they criticized that. So they were like the Sunni Muslims were behind the Shiites in that. And also it's all at the end of the day, it's all about power because Saudi Arabia sees itself as like tries to be a regional hegemon, and Iran also with its proxies. So there's always this Sunni Shiite war. But I feel like lately, as of late, Israeli actions and aggression in the region have sort of like united the Muslims a bit. So disregarding all the their previous conflicts towards each other. So I think you'll probably see more Sunni nations uniting with Shiite nations. We'll see. Maybe it's probably a miscalculation on the Israeli part. They think that oh, there's going to be overthrow of Iranian regime. Grossly miscalculated. No, actually, a lot of Iranians backed the Iranian leadership. Yeah, so you'll see more. And also, I think Qatar is actually working with Iran, big mediator. So Qatar is like mediating between multiple parties, Sunnis, Shiites, US, Israelis. Yeah, good question.
Uh, Doctor, Dr. Dani, my name is Alfat. Sorry, I have a question. Sorry, maybe my question will deviate a little from the main topic discussed today. If I'm not mistaken, I heard you mention APEC about APEC earlier. And as we know, the APEC is pro-Israel lobbying group in the United States. On the latest issues between Israel and Iran, the ICE Israel giving a proposal to the United States to get involved in the UR and in the war between the Iran and Israel. And I want to know, like, and at that time, the United States rejected that proposal. But at the end, the United States are involved in the war with by striking 3 points of nuclear development facilities in the Iran. So I want to know, like, is that because of the influence of APEC in the United States? And if it does the APEC holds a significant influence over strategic decision in the United States? That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alfaz, for your question. Good question. Uh, I do find it a bit weird because and disingenuous because US was actually having its sixth round of talks with Iran, right? So if you're having diplomacy, then how come you're actually bombing? So that's like bad faith, you know? So you're not really genuine about engaging in diplomacy and talks in the first place. So that caught the Iranians off guard. They were very angry about that. So two possible ways I'm looking at it. I think that what happened was the first way is so U.S. Discussions and negotiations with Iran were real and genuine. So Trump, because out of his ego, he canceled JCPOA agreement during the Obama administration, which have solved everything with regards to Iranian nuclear enrichment program and everything, in return for sanctions being lifted. Because you remember when Trump um, he just a few few months before this, he actually lifted sanctions off from Syria, right? So he's doing a lot of these things to end war. So there's some things of his policies that you see that it's in the right direction in terms of him owing up to his um, promises of trying to reduce wars in the Middle East, like lifting of sanctions, trying to support Syria and so on. But this is probably Israel doesn't like this. APEC lobby doesn't like this because they crave on systemic, perpetual violence. So yes, probably not in Israel's strategic interest. So what happened was, I think, during that sixth round of talks, Israel wanted to go ahead anyway because they're worried. They're really afraid. They're worried that Iran they might have peace with the United States, and when Iran has peace with the United States will not really have that much I guess will not really take Israeli security interests seriously anymore because they need a scapegoat. They need a perpetual threat. They need Iran to maintain as the boogeyman. So they went over it and strike anyway, knowing that Iran will retaliate. And then when Iran retaliate, I think that it will drag US into the war. But they told US about this, and maybe Trump was angry. We don't know behind the scenes. He was saying he was so angry he was shocked. This is the first possibility. He was angry, he was shocked, but he couldn't do anything. It was already fait accompli. It was already too late. So he had to just go along with it. He had to go along with it, and then he had to because he even said things like he disregarded his uh, security intelligence Tulsi Gabbard statement saying Iran doesn't have the capacity or means or doesn't have nuclear weapons yet, right? His own security intelligence agency. So what I think is that he's being pulled on both sides from AIPAC, pro-Israeli lobby, from the war hawks, the neocons, the evangelicals, the ones that want because they're it's not just the AIPAC Israeli lobby. There's also the war hawks that really want American action on Iran for a long time, military industrial complex and so on. So, but he had to come in and swoop in to take the limelight because he doesn't want them to hijack his ongoing peace treaty. He didn't want Netanyahu to be the face of this whole piece. So he came in and hijack and actually take over. So it's sort of like escalate to de-escalate, you know? So it's like he went ahead and bombed, sort of like a steak. You're supposed to have carrots and steak, right? But because Netanyahu, your supposed ally, jumped the gun, you have to do something to show that you're still in control. So he played along with it because US, I don't feel like US has control of Israel. Um, so sometimes I feel like US need to gain independence from Israel instead of the other way around. So he jumped the gun. So that's why Trump wants to be a strong man. He came in, right? He came in saying that, okay, we got to do this instead. Let's just, I'm going to bomb you. I'm going to bomb those three sites you mentioned. So he took over. So he came back to being the symbol of versus the Iran instead of Netanyahu. He doesn't want Netanyahu to hijack. Because remember when I don't think he likes Netanyahu, to be honest, because if you look at when Biden came to power, right? Netanyahu called, Trump called Netanyahu a traitor. He was calling Trump a traitor publicly. No, he was calling Netanyahu a traitor publicly. He was really upset with Netanyahu because how Netanyahu congratulated Biden. So it's like if he felt because businessmen they don't really like traitors, but then he cannot really do much. Maybe he just has to force to like Netanyahu. Um, so we also have to remember that Trump has through his son-in-law Jared Kushner has a lot of deals with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. So he has a lot of vested interests in the Arab world. Um, but I think he may be genuine in some aspects of his policy about not wanting for future wars in the Middle East. So second option, that's the first one. Second possibility is U.S. Actually knew from the start. Like I know that U.S. told Israel, Israel told U.S. that they were going to bomb, but they only told it like imminent, like 1 hour before they were going to bomb Iran. But the second possibility is that U.S. actually sort of like was disingenuous about the peace talks from the very beginning. They were already collaborating with Israel because if you look at it, how can Israel? Obviously, they need intelligence, military intelligence. They don't have that. Uh, like it's 3,000 kilometers, I think, or 1,000 something plus kilometers from Iran to Israel. They need refueling support and they need the logistics. So of course, probably and the intelligence for it, right? So there must be some backdoor intelligence coordination and cooperation. This is the second possibility that U.S. was just trying to put a facade, like they're just having this talks, like carrot and stick. Because we remember when Trump bombed Soleimani, right? That was on his own accord. He wanted to bomb Soleimani, probably with Israeli influence. So just those two things. that we could believe which one is right. Like US knew about it, they were disingenuous from the start, or they were not. They caught Israel by surprise. I mean, Israeli attack caught them by surprise at the last minute. So Trump had to come back in, had to steer it himself, and had to portray himself to prevent Netanyahu to hijack his whole like thing.
Very last more question from Arizaki too. Last one is, could you give a prediction for us if you can? And how does this conflict end? How long will it be?
Oh, thank you, Arik, for your question. Really good, brother Arik. Um, I think it's a bit open-ended. Um, I feel like because usually when you are forced to accept a ceasefire, like I said before, there must be some damage that uh, have been inflicted on you, right? Because if you're winning, why would you accept a ceasefire? But Israel accepted a ceasefire. So there obviously like one third of Tel Aviv was bombed, was destroyed. Haifa was bombed, Beersheba was bombed, like maybe 24 Israelis died, never before. And they probably grossly underestimated Iranians' response and uh, missile capabilities, right? Because if you see, Iran sent weapons, like they sent a barrage of missiles, they tested out the Iron Dome, depleted the Iron Dome's capacity to respond over time, and then they changed it up. They included a bit of, I think, hypersonic missiles, included a bit of like cluster munitions where the bomb came in, the missile came in, exploded, and then there's so many that the Iron Dome doesn't know which to intercept, right? So in a war of attrition, it could go on for years. Iran would have the upper hand. Israel cannot really do much, so it's forced to rely on um, U.S. aid because it's very expensive, these missiles. So and then obviously U.S. foreign policy changes from government to government, um, and there's a growing condemnation of Israel, never seen before. Growing condemnation, growing unpopularity, even among the MAGA. People don't really like Israel anymore. They're starting to realize that why are we fighting? Why are we sending our kids to die for Israel? What have they done for us? What's the benefit that Israel has given to average Americans? And I was thinking that, to be honest, I was thinking that Israel, because it's done false flag operations before, I was thinking that Israel might actually bomb US sites clandestinely, like US assets clandestinely, because they've done that with um, the USS Liberty, and then they tried to pin it on Egypt just to get America to fight Israel, and America to fight Egypt on Israel's side. So I was actually waiting for that. Like, is Israel gonna pin it on like Iran? Is Israel gonna pin it on like other of its enemies, saying that, oh, look, America, your assets got bombed, so you got to join the fight with us. You know, we don't know what Mossad is capable of. Um, and I think it's in terms of the imminent conflict, Israel conflict. I think it's already ended now for now, and this isn't like Lebanon, like we see with Lebanon, where they have the ceasefire and Israel broke it. This isn't like Gaza ceasefire brought by Trump when he first came to power, and then Israel broke it. This is an actual country, strong, sophisticated ballistic missile system, 90 million people, very advanced military relative to Lebanon and Gaza, Palestinians, that they actually are able to inflict damage on Israel. And the sooner the war goes on, I think people are going to see that, because you've already seen pictures of Tel Aviv, apocalyptic pictures. Never before seen have Israelis seen Tel Aviv so apocalyptic like that, you know, destroyed. And that's, you're talking about the financial center of Israel. So Israel is like, the key, I think what this is going to do is like, Iran definitely, the biggest strategic mistake that they've made to their strategic calculus is that they thought that Iran was easy to take on, and that there's going to be regime change. I don't think it's going to happen. All the more it does is that it tells to Iran that we're definitely going to have nuclear weapons now. We're definitely going to have nuclear weapons. We're going to have it secretly. Israel has attacked us, and what's going to happen is it actually give Iran some breathing space for Iran to reflect upon how was Israel able to conquer Iranian skies so easily, right? They're gonna improve on their. They're gonna learn from these mistakes. Definitely learn from these mistakes. They're gonna learn that okay, how are you gonna? We're gonna improve our air defense capabilities. We're gonna improve our jets, our air power, and all this. So it gives Iran tremendous lessons without losing too much. I mean, yes, 600 people died and so on. Very, very shameful. But Iran is still there. It still exists. There's no regime change. So I don't think Israel ever achieved its strategic objectives. It destroyed this and this. Iran can rebuild again. What it does is damages Israel's reputation even further. And then, of course, you have, while it's suffering losses in Gaza, recently 7 IDF soldiers died. Um, so I think that Israel will be more calculating in the future because I don't know what Netanyahu's impulse was to go in like that, strike Iran without any repercussion. They thought that Iron Dome was going to save them. They did save them, but yeah. And then Iran hasn't even, and I don't think Iran was going to ever close the Hormuz Strait because China gets a lot of oil from Iran, and Iran doesn't want any more enemies, right? So if it closes the strait, all of its alliances with China, whatever strategic interest with China, China is gonna start questioning, start like being really annoyed because it affects China. So that's why you see Iran didn't close the Hormuz Strait. And there's all of this cooperation, this coordination, like with Qatar. I think Qatar was informed beforehand Iran was only going to attack the airbase, not anything else in Qatar. So we'll just have to see how long, because there is still this ongoing tug of war in Trump's, in America between the pro-Israel people and the MAGA groups. And it's something that Trump has to stick, like put his foot down and decide for himself. But what we see in this, in hindsight, this 12-day war is Trump really, really put his foot down, and he's really proven himself to be the independent foreign policy maker, irrespective of all these. He's trying to really conciliate and bring together both sides as best as he can, but it's not too bad, at least. But I don't want to praise him too much yet. But I feel like he could have easily just went on with the war, dragged himself in, and just follow Israel blindly. But he didn't do that. So he put his foot down. He set Israel to stop. He Iran also was forced to stop and accept the ceasefire because Iran suffered a lot of damages as well, infrastructure, civilians, and so on. Yeah.
So I see we are running out of time. Yet I want to thank our speaker, Mr. Dani, for the interesting discussion and thanks to the participants for raising critical questions as well. So we have approached at the end of today's event. On behalf of the Political Science Society, the School of International Studies in Institute Malaysia, as well as the organizing committee, I would like to express our warm gratitude to our speaker, Mr. Dani, and our participants joining us today. It is through such inspiring discussion that we gain a clear picture of the world around us and our world within it. Before we conclude, we kindly invite all participants to turn on your camera for a photo session. Committees, please let us know once you have captured a screenshot. Thank you very much for today's session. Okay, once again, thank you so much, Mr. Dani. Thank you, participants, and my greatest appreciation to the organizing committees as well. To receive your certificate of attendance, please scan the QR code on the screen or click the registration form link at chat box. Stay connected with us for future events and updates. Follow us on Instagram at official PSPUEM. And until next time, take care and we look forward to see you at our next event in our next dinner in October 2025.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Jadi.